one of the countless billions of galaxies in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites, a green and insignificant planet, is now dead.
Welcome to Verse the World with Matt and Caleb. I'm Caleb.
And I'm Matt.
But this is a show where essentially we try and have people on, have a very open and courteous discussion about a topic, and try and expose ourselves to new ideas so that we can become smarter and better individuals. That's essentially the core of this. So how this would usually work is we would have a guest on each episode. That's the goal, so that we can constantly be getting new perspectives on things. Me and Matt will catch up, talk about a couple small topics we thought about this week, and then we'll go into the big topic with the guest. This week we don't have a guest, so me and Matt are just going to do the big topic.
We just got to share the love between two hosts because we don't got a guest.
We don't got a guest. One of us has to be entertaining at the very least. Do you want me to start us off? So
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the thing I want to talk about this week actually just happened today. I was talking to Larry Anderson. So Larry Anderson is a professor at the Christian college that me and Matt both went to in central Kansas. And he was the professor of ministry?
Yeah, because I was going to say theology, but that's the other guy.
Yeah.
Right? So anything biblical, he's probably teaching it.
Yeah.
Anything involving the Bible, basically.
And then the college didn't really have much philosophy to offer, but they needed at least an introduction to philosophy. So he did that one, which is where I kind of became friends with him, because that was my first exposure to philosophy, and that really changed my view of the world, and was like, I kind of got this perspective of at least 90% of our problems we're dealing with have been figured out by somebody somewhere in the past. So if you have a problem, research it before you ever start like trying to fix it, because there might already be a really good answer out there that isn't being implemented. And philosophy kind of taught me that. Like, a lot of the things that I had spent my whole life trying to figure out and like had come to some consensuses, people had already done it. So I could have been reading that whole time and learning. But anyways, so I was talking to him today. I ran into him at the coffee shop. Hadn't seen him for about a year, maybe closer to 2, at least a full year. And he remembered me and just kind of was like, hey, what's going on? What's new in life? And we started talking, and very quickly we shifted to ideas about theology, because he's a really cool guy, because he's deep into ministry, but I don't think skeptic's the right word, but he's like maybe openly speculative. He's not just going to assume that he's got the right answer. He's going to listen to like any opinion.
He's very open to like ideas, like a lot, and he'll tell you his view, but he'll also tell you kind of, this is what a lot of people think, and
he'll tell you exactly what he's struggling with at that time. Like if he's struggling with an idea about religion, like he won't like hide it. He'll be like, oh yeah, like that's actually what I'm wrestling with right now. Like, so he's an interesting religious person to talk to for me, because you know he's not closed-minded, and you know he's always furthering his understanding, because he's always struggling with something. He's always wrestling with something actively. But anyways, I was chatting with him. Yeah, this is turning into like a trailer for Larry Anderson.
Yeah, Anderson, the indie film. It would just be called Anderson. It just falls in the room.
I want to get him on the show. Like, he's my ultimate guest.
Definitely, eventually.
But we were talking, and we were talking about the Bible, and we were talking about Genesis and some views that I had been looking at about how, like, essentially maybe it's not important whether or not it's true in the sense of did God create the universe? It doesn't matter, because there's like universal truths in it. It's a story, and a story has something to teach you, and if you look at it just as mythology, even then you can get something out of it. So I was explaining some of that to Larry, and talking about some of the things Jordan Peterson said in his biblical lecture series, and he was really interested in it. And he kind of asked me, like, if I had that view where like God exists inherently, which is something I'm starting to like really believe. God exists inherently, so the argument of whether God exists or not is kind of a like pointless argument to a degree, because God exists, the idea of God exists. It's just whether man created God or God created man. But that idea exists in the world, and we can't take it back.
Yeah.
And so he thought that was really interesting, and he was asking me some questions of how that worked with the Bible. And one question that he asked me was, why would God call Abraham out and make him the leader of like a whole chosen nation in God's nation, which is seen as like a really like we still need to protect Israel to this day, like all that kind of stuff, like all stems from that Old Testament story. And he was saying like he has this view, kind of, I think what his view is that all kinds of different people all over the world have been called. If there is a God, all kinds of people have been called. Why did this story stay intact? And he said he thinks people were being called all over the place. That's one view that he's heard that he thinks is really interesting. But Abraham responded. And so that's why that story exists, is because Abraham responded to whatever was calling him. And that's interesting. And then he said something that really made me think, which was, if you look at when this story is supposed to have taken place in history, this the Abrahamic culture would have come out of the Sumerian culture. And that's like the first written language, the first evidence of written language that we have. And so he kind of like asked the question of, is the reason that Abraham's called and that story still exists to this day is because language existed, where stuff like that might have happened back when there was exclusively oral tradition, but language hadn't been created yet.
Basically, is that the idea?
Yeah. So we don't have those stories.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes Abraham called to some degree. And I thought that was really interesting.
So yeah, that's something I struggled with for a long time with religion. Is I got to a point a couple years ago where I was like, I can't believe, and I'd still like to talk, like maybe talking to Larry, which is what you did. It's really hard for me to believe, maybe not the whole Bible, but there's stuff where I'm like, this is a story. Like, I can't take this literally. It's written like a story. It's written like any other type of symbolic story.
Yeah.
Like, I think of Genesis a lot because I'm like, you have this tree of forbidden fruit, and they're in this garden, and they take bite of the fruit, and they know the knowledge of good and evil, and there's an evil serpent. That's all symbolic to me. Like, it sounds like it's written that way. It doesn't sound like a history report, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like, that idea of truths coming out of it is what made me go like, feel a little less nihilistic almost, because it's like, wow, like, am I to a point where it's like, oh, this is a story? It's like, well, it's a story, but that doesn't mean it's any less important.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, how do we know that wasn't the intention when they were written? Like, how do we know that those first several stories weren't, they were written to be stories? Because Genesis doesn't get detailed until you get to Abraham. Every other story takes place like really rapid fire. Like, it's like, this happened, and then this cataclysm happened, and then this happened, this is what they did, that's how it happened, and then they moved on. And then next, let's go to Noah, this is what happened, this is what happened. You don't even get a sense of time. You get to Abraham, it's like, in this year, Abraham was called out. At this time, he went into this specific land, alongside this specific land, and did this thing. He stayed there for this many years. So, like, clearly there's a difference in the writing styles. And with what little I have studied, I know that Genesis comes from multiple different sources all stitched together, and like that makes sense. But even then, I think it might be from the same source. The end of those stories up through like the Tower of Babel and then to Abraham is part of the same source material. So clearly there's a different writing, like a different intention with the stories at the beginning and the attempt to like catalog the historical events in his life.
Yeah.
But then people now, they don't have the correct perspective, and so then you get a lot of Christians who think that it needs to be interpreted as this literally happened in this way. And how is that better for you than going, oh, this is a story and you can get the symbolism and it's telling you some kind of truth through the symbolism.
Well, and Jesus told parables all the time.
Yeah.
That was like one of his main hobbies, was going around telling like stories. but for real, it's like he really does. He was telling parables and stuff all the time. We get things out of those. But it's like, I mean, you wouldn't say those were literal. We know they're parables. It's like, you know.
I think some people, there's a few Christians who actually like think the parables are recounted stories. Probably not nearly as many as people who think that creation literally happened in 6 days. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And yeah, that's the thing is, if you go, well, if it's not literal, what's the point? Like, this is supposed to be truth. Well, Jesus was telling parables to instill a more important truth that couldn't have been told with one person's very specific life story, unless you could find somebody who had a life story that could tell you a universal truth.
Yeah.
So clearly, sometimes there's more importance in fictional stories. There's more truth in fictional stories than in true stories.
And they used to say, and this isn't that bad, they used to say in church all the time, they'd be like, the definition they would try to say of a parable, like, what's a parable? And the definition that you're supposed to say, like in the church answer, was like, it's a heavenly story. Or
sorry, I'm just remembering stupid church sayings.
No, I thought you were laughing because I almost said it backwards. No, it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning or something like that. It's pretty stupid, but in a way, it's like
it's a Christian Hallmark card.
Yeah, exactly. But it
That's
also
what it would say on your parable mints.
Yeah.
The Testaments still, to this day, upset me.
Yeah, well, that one I think is like not too far off in a way, because it's like, okay, this is something that you can understand within a story that you can't comprehend otherwise. So like that Genesis stuff, if you want to take it literally, it's pretty complex. If you want to take it symbolically, it's even more complex, I think.
And you can get more out of it.
And you can get more out of it, and it's like, whoa, like this is something that it's like, okay, something's being explained here in a way that even children can understand, and there's a reason maybe that's so.
Well, and a quick aside to that, as like a point of reference, so I know a lot of Christians who think the snake in the tree was Satan. And then I know Christians who think they're two different creatures, but Satan convinced the snake to tempt them. And it's like either one of those doesn't exactly make sense, because if it was Satan who was the snake, and then God cursed the snake to make it spend the rest of its days on the earth crawling around on its belly, and then he just goes, nah, screw this, I'll go back to my half angel form. And then he goes back to being Satan. That punishment was pointless. Like he can just anamorph back into Satan instead. Or you have to assume that Satan is currently a snake. Neither of those makes any damn sense. And then if you go, oh, what happened if you were there that day in the garden? Can you imagine being there that day in the garden? Stupid. But it's like, if you imagine that, so the devil came up to this snake and was like, hey buddy, here's what I want you to do. Here's the scheme. You're going to tell this girl, eat this fruit. And he's like, hey, you know what? I'm getting nothing out of this. Might as well do it. It's boring here in paradise. Nothing's ever happening. Why don't I introduce a little chaos? It doesn't make any sense. But if the snake is a representation of something that's innately an enemy that you shouldn't trust, humans can't trust snakes. The way that they move and stuff, you can't predict them super well unless you really, really study snakes. But in an ancient time, snakes are a huge threat. So this story is telling you this thing that's happening to her is a huge threat to her.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense. So yeah, and that's all on the side. But it's kind of like an example of why would you take it literally? What benefit can you get? Though, again, maybe we can get somebody on the show who believes a literal interpretation of the Bible, and maybe they can convince us that there's more benefit in that.
I'd like that, because I have a lot of ideas the last couple of years, but I've talked to friends or people about this sort of thing, and they're not as I almost would like someone to challenge me about it. Not that I want to argue, but I actually want to I feel like I could develop my ideas better, because otherwise it's just me thinking, and then I don't want to get too stuck in that way of thinking. So I think it would be good to have a couple people on who could explain that.
So then, did you have something you wanted to talk about that?
Do we have time?
Yeah, we have time.
Okay. I kind of came up with this off the top of my head because it's something that annoyed me today, which sounds bad, but...
What did I do?
No. Facebook... I'll probably complain a lot about Facebook on the show. I'm going to say it now. I think Facebook's a great resource and all that, blah, 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 whatever. Doesn't have as much to do with the website, okay? It has to do with people. This is a little bit, I think, of what you said a future guest wanted to talk about a little bit, so maybe we won't get too deep into it. But people on Facebook share posts all the time without bothering at all to do research. And it's such a disturbing thing because it's so constant, it's so rampant. It's not like something that people talk about, but it doesn't really happen, or no, people aren't really like that. It's like, no. And sometimes it's something really serious, and sometimes it's something as stupid as like, no one bought our PlayStation 4s on Black Friday, so we're giving them away for free if you share this. I saw a post like that on Facebook. I clicked on it, and the description of the page was like, hey, guys, this is all BS. I just do this to see how gullible people are. But someone I had shared it, and they photoshopped free over the little sign on a Walmart picture. It was so bad, and someone shared it so blindly, which that's kind of funny, but there's times where it's like, it'll be stuff about the president or really serious stuff. Like, I mean, especially if people are prone to bias, because if it's something that's like, hey, you know they're trying to do this to your guns, or do you know they're trying to do this to gay marriage or anything, it doesn't matter what side you're on, the groups will just sometimes blatantly lie. And people are like, I want to be against that so hard that I'm not going to bother to look at it, I'm just going to share it.
If we made a fake article that said they're trying to make gay marriage even more gay, and that was just the headline, and we made like a BS article and everything and put it up somewhere and like tried to contrive the story about how like they were gonna like, I don't know, give gay marriages more tax breaks to motivate I don't know, more gay households or something like that. Do you think there's people in your friend group who would just share that?
Unfortunately, I definitely do. It pisses me off to get on Facebook these days. Like, yeah, you could say something like orphanages more likely to I almost said donate a child, but more likely to like let gay couples adopt children or something. Then I know that there'd be several people, if they just saw that in a post, please share so that we can make sure this bill doesn't get passed or something. They would share it. They wouldn't know what the bill name was because it doesn't exist. They wouldn't bother to look into it.
Yeah.
And that's just something that just frustrates me so much because.
Well, the guest that hopefully we'll have on next week, it's a little bit more of a specific, maybe a more brutal cause of why that happens, which is people's tendency to regurgitate without assessing. And that's a big thing, because that's kind of one of our main pillars for the show, that we want to be a counterculture to that.
Yeah.
And we want to get people thinking about like, oh, maybe I need to open myself up to alternative views before I make a decision and start like promoting a goal. But in that specific instance, I think that's even more dangerous than we realize. Elon Musk, I was listening to him this week, was talking about AI, which he's terrified of AI,
yeah.
and you see a lot of like gags about it all the time. Like you'll even see memes about him being terrified of AI on iFunny and shit like that.
Yeah.
But it's like oh stupid Elon Musk terrified of Skynet. That'll be the article name or something like that. Like something so close to that you can't even parody it. But he was talking about it, and it really made me think. He was talking about how like AI processing systems that just kind of take a lot of information and then like adapt to it and then behave based on the information it receives are working much faster than they intended. He was talking about a couple systems that were AI systems that were designed to play the Chinese game Go.
Yeah.
I think it's Chinese.
Yes.
Might be Japanese.
I don't know, because a lot of different cultures play it, but I think it is Chinese.
Okay. But they thought it would take quite a while before it could. I think they said like 20 years before it would even be able to beat like the best player, the world best player, and it happened last year.
Yeah, I saw that.
And then it was able to simultaneously play the 50 best players at the same time and beat all of them. It didn't lose one game. And then somebody else created a system that was able to do the same thing, but without playing human opponents. It self-taught using the rules and ran so many simulations that it's that good before it played anybody. And it's like, and they said that one you could program in the rules for any game, and it would quickly learn how to play the game. That's so fast.
They did it with League of Legends, didn't they?
I think so.
Where like yeah, I think they did that with a video game. It's like, that's a really complicated game, but I think it was like, I guess Eric would know, but he doesn't.
But so he gave an actual like anecdotal evidence of why he thinks that system is already dangerous, and he basically said, okay, so So recently there was like a scare. I can't remember what it was, but it was like it was an airliner got shot down for getting to like being in a country's airspace, and that happened. I believe is what he was saying. But he was like, what would it take, like if a system like this was connected through social media, and its directive was to benefit this country's like economy. It could generate a fake article saying that like an airline went down and was attacked by this country or something. Share it. It would get shared by the human component, and then it could also hack into the airliner and just kind of like redirect the traffic of that plane to fly over and possibly get shot down.
Whoa. And
it's already generated the information as it's doing it, so the information is being shared before the event has actually happened, and it triggered that entire event and could start a war. It would manipulate all that information to start a war, and he said that's theoretically possible as of now. And it's like, that wouldn't be as much of a threat in my estimation if we didn't have mindless people sharing stuff without looking into it, because it would have to make more, and it probably would be, you know, maybe this is a bad example because it wouldn't be much more complicated for it to generate all of the information needed to make a piece of like true information, like seemingly true information, but it wouldn't even have to do that. It could make one fake article.
Yeah, that's scary. I don't know what's scarier there, the AI or the people. Probably the people, in my opinion. But
at least we can do something about them, am I right? Anyway, so should we get on to the main topic, or did you have any?
I think that's it. Like, yeah, let's move to the.
All right, so we're getting to the real turkey dinner of this dinner. Fuck, messed that up. So the main topic we wanted to talk about today was the idea of the shadow self, which I believe Carl Jung was the one who originally created this psychological idea. When he was, and he may not have been the originator, but he's at least the person who popularized the theory of the shadow self. And it's something, admittedly, that me and Matt aren't like experts on. We haven't like read all of Carl Jung's work or anything like that. But it's something we wanted to talk about because we've learned a decent deal about it, and it's interesting to us. So should I like give a definition, then you give a definition of what we think it is?
Well, yeah. Well, you go ahead and then we'll.
Okay.
Just
so essentially, the idea of the shadow self is that there's kind of multiple behaviors that you have like inside of you. You know, like somebody says like, oh, I don't know why I keep doing this. Well, in that moment, you're behaving in a different set of like behaviors and standards than you normally do, and that's kind of a different sub-personality within your personality. And so Jung thought that there was a lot of different personalities all competing within a person, all striving to get what they want, basically. And my understanding of it currently is that there's like a shadow self within that. There's a personality that's the part of you that does like the terrible things that you feel like really bad about. And the things that you like seemingly can't control. And the way we tend to view that part of ourselves is like, we don't see it as us. Mm-hmm. We see it as, oh, I don't know why I did that. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Why would I do this? You know, you got really upset and you hit your wife or something like that. And you're like, that's not me. I don't do that. I just, in that moment, I just lost it and I hit her. And that's not part of me. And that's kind of how we tend to view it. And so we kind of like subjugate it into like a corner of our psyche and don't acknowledge it as part of us. We think it's you know, maybe something possessed us or something controlled us, and we don't acknowledge that it's us that's doing it. And so the theory, as I understand it, is that like you need to integrate your shadow self, and that starts with accepting that that is you. You did that, and you do that, and you have reasons for doing it, and you kind of have to look inwards and think, why do I do this? What are the reasons that I would have to do this? But the benefit of it is that you integrate those two personalities, and so you're able to control yourself better because you actually know your enemy is you, and you know why you do things, and you know how to avoid it further. That's the general understanding of it that I have.
That's sort of the understanding that I got from it. It's like you don't want to run. Well, you can't run from your shadow, and that's sort of the point. Because it's a part of you and it's always there. And it's that idea of embracing the fact that you're capable of evil things. Because everyone, well, at least this is sort of an interpretation that I got of it. But it's that idea of us thinking that someone who goes and shoots up a school is evil incarnate, and they were born that way, and I wasn't born that way, and I don't have the capacity to do that. But really, under the right circumstances, you are perfectly capable of doing that. You're perfectly capable of being a Nazi. You're capable of like horrible things. And the idea is, instead of trying to act like you're not or run from those ideas, you go, no, everyone sort of has the capacity to be those things. It really gets to know, this is the thing that interests me the most about it, is morality, because it made me view the idea, and this is from Jordan Peterson, which he probably got from Jung, but it was that thing where he was saying about morality that you basically, oh man, I lost my train of thought there.
Oh, okay.
But basically the idea when he was talking about morality in the shadow self was that a truly moral person is the one who has the capacity to do evil but doesn't. Because an innocent person or someone who just doesn't have the capability to be like a terrible person or do evil things, even though they're innocent and they haven't done anything wrong, they're less moral in a way than the person who has the capacity.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like one issue that we've been talking about recently, because it came up in my personal life, the idea of like a Christian who says, just don't drink, like just don't, like it's bad, don't do it. But looking through the Bible, you can't really find a solid foundational proof of alcohol is innately wrong and alcohol is innately a sin. You can clearly see that there's a lot of sins that can spawn from the use of alcohol because it causes inhibition. You don't think things through nearly as much. And because of that, like I can totally understand their point, but what about who's the better believer and who's the more moral believer? The one who just refuses to even like look at it, don't allow it anywhere near me. I won't even go to a bar to talk to somebody like who wants to discuss like Christianity with me, because I don't want to be around it, because it's a sin to even like tempt yourself with that. Or the person who can like drink alcohol, stop himself from doing anything, like have enough self-control to not get drunk, have enough self-control to not put himself in a bad situation, have enough control that if he ends up in a bad situation to say no, and still maintain his morals, and have that in there. And it's not like you need to drink in order to do that, but you kind of can't even begin to face that if you haven't at least exposed yourself to it a little bit. And then you can go into a bar and witness to somebody who's like, you know, maybe on the edge of the knife, like in a bar, like getting drunk, about to make some terrible decisions. You can go in there and like talk to him, and you're not like afraid and like being oppressed. You're able to like go in there and witness in that environment. And it's from the moral standpoint, I think that's kind of maybe an anecdotal look at that. It's like if you think you are incapable of killing somebody, and probably a lot of people like think that, then you're not doing a good thing by not killing somebody. You think you're incapable of it, so you're completely neutral and naive in that.
Yeah. And
you probably could be put in a situation where you'd end up killing somebody because you haven't wrestled with that. But somebody who goes, wait a minute, what would there be about me that would prevent me from killing somebody?
Yeah.
Do I innately have the capacity to kill somebody? And then wrestling with that idea and understanding, like creating understanding within yourself of why you wouldn't kill somebody. So that if you ever did accidentally end up in a situation where you have the temptation to murder somebody, and you could maybe even seemingly get away with it, you're not going to behave that way because you've already established what you believe.
And I wonder if integrating the shadow, the reason why that's so useful is because if you say, I don't want to ever drink or go to a bar or whatever, that's sort of it's sort of weakness, but also what if you do go to a bar and all of a sudden you are doing those things that you thought you were incapable of doing, or murder, which I guess is the big thing. If you all of a sudden are in a situation where you want to murder someone or something, you don't know how to deal with that. And also you're convincing yourself every step of the way that, well, I'm not that person, instead of being like, I need to be careful here because I can see myself doing that.
And then before you know it, you're participating in the thing that you thought you would never do, and you're questioning, I wouldn't do this. Like, and that's where psychological trauma can occur, I think. Where somebody, and from my understanding, a lot of PTSD, there is some, like in veterans specifically, there is something to seeing something so terrible and not being able to get rid of that. But most of the people who come back from war and really struggle with PTSD, from my understanding, it's the people who did something that they did not think they were capable of. Like, they're in a situation where they're fighting for their life and, like, murder someone in a horrific way for survival, or maybe they didn't even do it for survival. Maybe they were in the rage and in the intensity of the situation, and they do something so terrible that when they then come back, they know that they had the capacity to turn into a monster, and they didn't believe that about themselves before. How do they ever understand themselves again? How do they make that fit with their view of themselves? And so it's that it causes this, like, just absolute struggle of you being two people and you denying part of that, instead of it being one person understanding that you had that capability. And that's why this idea is so interesting to me, because it seems almost necessary. Like, well, I shouldn't say almost, like it seems necessary, but almost like an essential part of life. Like, if you don't do that, it seems to me you're more likely to be the person who commits a heinous crime.
Yeah, because you won't know how you got there either.
And most people in prison, like, I think, based on, like, pastors I've talked to and stuff who like witness in prisons and stuff, there's a majority of them who say, it was one moment, I just lost it. And they completely regret that decision. It isn't a decision that they consciously made to do.
Because maybe up until the moment they did that, they didn't think they could do that. And now it's too late. Yeah. And so to them, it is a snap of the fingers.
And then they wrestle with it for the rest of their life and can't understand that. And I think that's why so many people suffer from PTSD. And like this is kind of an even heavier subject, so, like, I'm hesitant to get into it. But, like, people who maybe end up in a situation where they're so naive as to how they view themselves and what they think of themselves, that they kind of just bumble around through life, and like a woman who goes to a bar and, like, lets men buy her drinks, and then before she knows it, she ends up back home with them and is waking up from sex with them. And I'm not talking about a one-time occurrence. I'm talking about, like, a pattern, like a reoccurring pattern of this. But then turns around one day and thinks, like, I didn't want to do any of that. So was I raped in those situations?
Yeah, because then they're wrestling with the idea of who they are or what they did. I didn't do that.
I didn't do that. I didn't want to do that. But it was you who went through all those behaviors. Like, and I'm not talking about necessarily the sexual behaviors, but you keep putting yourself in that environment, and you don't even understand that you shouldn't.
Yeah. You
don't even understand yourself well enough to go, I shouldn't be going to the bar and doing this, and I shouldn't be doing this repeatedly, and I don't like this, and I don't like... You haven't explored yourself even well enough to know that you don't like doing this, and you're doing it. You're almost autonomous. And I think that's why there's so many, like, really dangerous situations like that. And it makes it, to an extent, it makes some of these issues even harder for the moral people who are in a position where they have to judge or make a decision, or they're on a council or anything to decide, well, how do we, like, legislate these situations, when some of these situations are, like, malevolent acts of like murder or rape or what have you, and some of these are partially on the person who doesn't even understand them well enough to not do this. And in case of a victim and aggressor, it makes it incredibly difficult to unravel. Like, do you judge somebody who intentionally decided to, like the Columbine shooters? They made a conscious decision. They wrote letters about it. They made a plan to cause as much catastrophe as they could because that's what they wanted to do, and that's what they thought would give them the most satisfaction in life, because life was so oppressive and meaningless that it should be ended. Can you hold that person on the same level? Like, is that the same act as a person who, in the heat of the moment, murdered his wife and doesn't understand how he did that?
Yeah. You know what's interesting about like the Columbine shooters and stuff is, I always used to think that's, if someone said like, do you think there's actually true evil in the world? You go, yeah. Like, look at those guys. Look at this guy. Look at like, Ted Bundy or any of these like serial killers and stuff. Is that the right name? But any of these serial killers, if you go, yeah, that's true evil. Mm-hmm. But then is that really the way we should really look at it? Because you go like, well, maybe there is evil, mm-hmm. but it's not like you're not born evil. Like, there's got to be somewhere along the lines where like maybe.
I think definitely not. I think at this point we know enough that I think we would have to rule that argument out. Yeah. Somebody being born evil, I think, is impossible. And
that's the toughest part, because I've been thinking a lot about that, like embracing my own shadow. What am I capable of? I mean, like this. This is a weird thing to say, but I joke. I'll like joke around about like, you think about like Hitler and stuff, mm-hmm. and there are times where I get really irritated with the fact that we have a lot of like regulations and stuff. Me and Eric were talking about it yesterday, mm-hmm. about like, man, like why do they have to stop make fireworks illegal in Colorado? Like if some kid blows his hands off, like that's his fault or his parents' fault. Like, why don't they let him do it? And sometimes I'll get to the point of even joking like, yeah, let these people, like, let evolution take its course. Like, let the dumb people, whatever. Yeah. But then I go, how far is that off from, like, Hitler's thinking in a weird way?
Yeah.
Even though I'm sort of joking, but sort of not. I'm sort of like, well, there is sort of the logic there in my head. I'm making this logic. And I don't want to think that, but I'm like, that's somewhere on a very far spectrum, but the same spectrum of thought. And it's like, whoa, like there's a little tiny bit of me that might think similar to the way that the Nazis thought. And that's really weird. Like, that's a scary thing to think about.
Well, and it's like, yeah, like if you can ever sit down and think, I could be like, not just like, oh, you, like the alternative to this is thinking everything is nurture. In the right circumstances, you would do the same thing as somebody else. Like in the right set of circumstances, I would be Hitler. It's not, I don't think that it's about what did you experience exclusively. It's also about what you choose to do. Yeah. I think there's a part of that. I think if I experienced the same things as Hitler, I might do just as terrible things, but probably not the same things. Yeah. It's not like the situation makes the man necessarily. But you do have to understand that you could go to the same extremes. You have the capacity. Just as a human being, you have the capacity to be Hitler. You have the capacity to make that decision. You have that capacity to make that choice, and that's something I've struggled with in a couple stories I've written, which maybe started my whole understanding of this. My experience with the shadow self, the first time I realized, you like probably when I realized that I could deny my capacity. Like I probably thought some man, I wish I could just really stick it to this guy, or if I was strong enough and master of kung fu, I'd beat up all these a-holes at high school, like that kind of stuff. But when I realized that I had the capacity to do something truly evil, I was in college and I was writing a story. I was like giving myself writing challenges, like, okay, well this isn't a genre of film I like, so can I write a rom-com? And then I would come up with like a story, like a pretty detailed outline of what I would do for a rom-com, and then like kind of tell it to some people and see if they thought it was good innately, and then, okay, like what kind of story would you say this is? Oh, a rom-com. And I'd be like, okay, so like I have some capacity to do that. And I was like testing my limits as a storyteller, and I decided to do a horror story. And this was before I'd really watched much horror. Because I wasn't into horror at all, because I thought it was kind of a lesser film, like a lesser genre somehow. Probably because there's probably a vast majority more well-known B horror movies than like really good crappy, A horror movies, because that seems to be what people want from the genre more. But after being exposed to like The Exorcist,
Couple of goodies.
Yeah, a couple of goodies. The Babadook was the first horror movie I watched where I was like, wait, this is a good movie. Mm-hmm. This is inherently a good story, like a well-done story, well-directed. I was like, that was my first exposure to horror. It's going to be this good thing. So I watched a couple. This is before that. This is when I still thought horror was kind of a cheap genre. I was like, could I write a horror story? And I was like, well, I really want to prey on fear if I'm going to do that. I don't want to do a jump scare. I don't want to just go blah. I don't want to use like, oh, well, witches are scary, so I'll do a witch, or spiders are scary, so I'll do a spider. Like, I didn't want to do anything like that. I was like, I want to get to like the psychology of fear. Like, what preys on me in an almost evolutionary sense? What am I afraid of? And we've talked about this a little bit. You know, the idea of, like, have you ever been in a room and like all the doors are closed, and for some reason you just start thinking what's on the other side of that door, mm-hmm. and you just, like, all kinds of weird stuff just run through your head, and you just start getting terrified. And you know when you open that door, nothing's going to be there, but the little inkling of what if it was is terrifying. Yeah. So I was like, what would be the worst thing possible? And I started like wrestling with like morality a little bit, and I decided to write a story about a killer who'd never killed before, and decided to reunite with a bunch of his friends, a bunch of his college age friends, like a couple years out. They all get back together to hang out, like back in the old town, and they get together, like hang out, have a few drinks, and then they go somewhere, and he basically has like planned out and built a torture, like a hall of torture for them. And so he brings he tricks all of his friends in there, locks them in there, and then systematically kills each and every one of his friends in the most psychologically traumatic way that he can think of for each of them, because he's really good friends with them, so he knows what their weaknesses are and what they struggle with. And some of them he even drives to kill themselves. And so I was thinking about this, and I was like, okay, well, how would I do this? And so I kind of like was playing with my group of friends at the time, and like it was really like a simple story at first, but then I was like, okay, like I can't just tell somebody and then he kills them all in a way that's really terrible to them. I was like, what would be a terrible way? So I started, you know, I made kind of one-dimensional versions of all of my group of friends at the time, and I was like, okay, so this guy's dating that girl. Okay, well, I wouldn't want to break them apart right away. I want to make them see what's going to happen before I kill one of them, so that they can start to feel the terror of, and they can start to have the realization of they're going to die while they're still together, so that they can suffer through that together, and then they have to suffer with the idea of who's going to die first. So this is some really dark stuff.
Yeah.
But I was doing it to just see if I could write horror. Well, by the end of the writing like practice, I had figured out which of my friends like were like could easily like be brought to kill themselves, and like what situation I would have to put them in where I could be standing over them and they could have the opportunity to kill me or themselves, and I would know that they would kill themselves. And which like when to pull the like couples apart, and which of the two couple to kill, because which one's more committed to the other. Like I systematically murdered all of my friends in my mind in terrible ways for the sake of writing a story. And at the end of it, the killer left the weakest, the most naive one out of them all alive, and basically explained all the reasons why he did this, and he actually loves all of them and doesn't want, like, has nothing against any one of them. They're the most important people in his life. He did this because he just had to know that he had free will, because people have free will, but they always act in a way that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You can always, with enough like study, you can understand exactly why they made that decision. And he was like, so I wanted to make the decision that made the least amount of sense to me. So I had to kill all of you in ways that I really didn't want to, because otherwise how do I know that I have free will? Like he just goes on this like wild rant to her, while he's broken her legs, is on top of her, like ranting all of this to her, and tells her, okay, you deal with that, and then shoots himself, and his body pins her down so she can't escape until someone comes to rescue her. So she's left with all of her friends being dead, like in this horrible situation, and she's the one person who's gonna live. And I was like, what a great story. Like this could be a fantastic horror movie.
How quickly did you go, I really hope, like where you're like, oh crap, if someone sees this?
Pretty quick, but I didn't think of myself as the killer.
Yeah.
I was still thinking of them as characters. And then I was telling one of the friends about it, because she was also a writer, and I was telling her, oh yeah, I wrote this horror story and blah blah blah, and she was like, oh, but how scary could it be? And I was like, I don't think you'd want to hear it. Like, it's pretty scary. And she was like, I don't know about that. And I was like, well, like, here's kind of how I wrote it. And she was like, what? So you, like, killed your friends? Like, how would you do it? And I was like, I don't want to say that out loud, because then it would look like I'm a psychopath. Like, I would never do any of this.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, well, yeah, I get that. If you weren't going to do any of this, just tell me. And I was like, okay, like, here's how I would kill this person. Like, whoa, that's, like, that makes perfect sense. And that's, like, really, like, fucked up. And then she was like, how would you kill me? And I was like, I'm not going to tell you that. And she was like very, very adamant. And it was like late at night. And I finally told her how I would kill her. And I think I left her like stunned. She wasn't mad at me at all. But it was like I had already started, like, in telling her, some of the praying from the story like happened to her. And I told it as like simply as I could put it. I didn't put it in like excruciating detail or anything. And she was just like, yeah, that would do it. And she was like, fuck. But she thought it was a really good story.
Yeah.
But it, like, I could see it shook her a little bit. And then that's when I realized the killer is me.
Yeah.
That's how I'm writing it.
You could say that oh, I would never do that. But you maybe can't say, I could never do that.
Because clearly I could, because I had written all of that. I'd come up with all of that. And that's when I started to understand, like, I'm capable of things that I wouldn't do, but I could.
Yeah.
And I was whoa.
Do you think it was a good experience, that? Like, do you think...
Yeah, but it messed me up for a little while. Like,
I wonder...
Like I had to figure out, there's a huge difference between could and would. And that's the really defining thing. Because I know even in an extreme circumstance, I would never do that. So now I know what my limitations are much better, so I feel like... Oops. I feel like I could probably, in a very, very intense, heated situation, I could avoid that.
Yeah. Well, do you think... Well, because what I'm thinking about it is, and this is purely, like, exploration, because I haven't heard, like, Jordan Peterson or anything go into this, but I just wonder if the idea of manifesting your shadow in an artistic way is useful. Like, and one of the things I'm thinking about, we just watched that movie Toxic Avenger last night. It's like a really crappy kind of B film, but there's a scene in the movie where they run over a little kid. You know, like they hit him with the car and stuff.
Yeah.
I was reading online that Lloyd Kaufman, the writer-director, accidentally was backing out of his driveway, wasn't paying attention, and hit his little sister. And she didn't die, but he said it like traumatized him for a really long time, and he put it into the movie for some reason. I was like, well, why does that make sense? But it almost makes me think, like, in a way, he was like him manifesting like the worst thing that could have happened. Like, I wonder if that's helpful.
I think it might be. The one thing I'll say is I realized I still need to integrate my shadow self, because I feel like that'll help me overcome some struggles that I haven't been able to overcome in my personal life before. And they're not like really terrible things or anything like that, but I was like, well, if I understand I have the capacity to be a Nazi in Nazi Germany and like it and enjoy it, I have the capacity of that. Yeah. Understanding that, then I have to accept the responsibility of these things that I do occasionally that I regret, and I'm like, oh, that's not me. It is me.
Yeah, and you have
why
to
is
accept
it me?
that.
Why am I like that? What am I trying to gain out of it that I won't admit to myself? So that way I can break the problem down and then avoid that problem too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just because, I mean, here's the thing. It's like we got into really deep, like, dark subjects of this.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's
hopefully, it wasn't to freak anybody out or anything.
Yeah.
Hopefully that didn't upset any listeners. But for the sake of showing, like, the degree that you have to understand yourself.
And I think that explores the depths of it. But the good thing about that is, in real life, when I'm, like me lately and you both, I mean, I'm assuming it's the same, integrating our shadow, I haven't sat there and been like, I'm a cold-blooded murderer and I need to cope with this. It's like, no, it's more like, oh, I lie a lot, or I lie about this, and that's a big issue. And instead of it always being before where it's like, well, no, I had to because of this, or that wasn't me, or no, I don't really do. It's like, no, I lie, and I need to figure out how to, like, solve that issue.
Yeah.
Or, you know. So that's yeah. I mean, even though it's looking at the darkest depths of it, it's like, it's not For an average person, I don't think you're worried about that.
Yeah,
but
and it's not like that benefited me in the sense of well, now, like, the goal, because it wasn't goal-oriented, it was completely accidental. It's not like, okay, well, now that I know that, I need to sit down and think every terrible thing that I'm capable of doing so that I don't do it. No. But now that I know, okay, anything terrible I see someone do in history, knowing that I have the capacity to be that, now I can look at every terrible little thing that I do and understand that that's me too. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying with the line, like, yeah, it's like, okay, like, I think I'm being honest, but I'm actually lying to myself.
Yeah.
Why am I doing that? What am I... It's like there's two sides of me, and they're tricking each other so that they can both get what they want. I can feel good and feel like I'm not a liar, but I do these little lies to get me through things that I don't want to deal with. Well, if I was honest, then I would know why I'm doing it. Maybe I can address it, stop lying to myself, and live a better life. So it's not like, I think the importance of the shadow self, maybe if you're in a really dark place and you're at risk of doing something terrible, mm-hmm. like, then maybe it can be used in that way too. But the benefit for, like, anybody is understanding, like, if you've done something in your life that you're not incredibly proud of and that you try to block out, it wasn't an accident thing, like, oh, I tripped in front of this person, it was the most embarrassing moment of my life, but, like, oh, I cheated on my boyfriend, and you're like, oh, like, that makes me shitty, but, like, you know, with the situation, if I hadn't been in that situation, I would have done it. If I hadn't been in this, okay, but what is it? What's in you that wanted to do that in that situation? And address that, look at that, and know that that's part of you, so that you can control it.
I think that's a good example of something that's, like, bad, that, like, because, like, temptation on that level, mm-hmm. I think most people can probably relate to, mm-hmm. where you're like, oh, I could never feel that way, or like, oh, I'd never be that type of thing, but then it's like, oh, when that happens, you're like, oh, mm-hmm. and it's like, whoa.
Yeah, well, and I think an interesting thing from a biblical standpoint, there's this weird thing with some Christians where they're like, avoid all temptation. Mm. But even the Bible, like, tells you that God won't tempt you more than you can handle.
Yeah.
So I don't think, I think it's like a gradation thing. There's two sides of a scale, and you go too far either way, you're doing something wrong. You just give in to all your temptations, clearly you're doing something wrong, and you're probably not going to last very long. But you don't even expose yourself to any temptations. I think there's a problem in Christian parenting. If you don't allow your child to be tempted to some degree, you as the parent should understand yourself well enough to understand your child, to know what temptation that child can handle on their own before you have to step in and stop them.
Yeah.
So that way they can start to fight their own temptations.
It appears to me that it's...
And if you don't expose yourself to temptations at all, you're going to be a really weak person, and then you're going to make a big mistake.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. It's like, I think not exposing yourself to all these different temptations and sort of your darker side, but giving into all of it is weak. Mm-hmm. It's an easy way out. Like, you don't have to try to fight it. Mm-hmm. But it's also weak to never embrace your dark side, never engage in any of these things, because eventually, well, we got into that, but the only way where you can really be strengthened through it is to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. But it's the hardest path.
And yeah, it is.
Well, and I think there's an interesting thing that Jordan Peterson was talking about. He was talking about a verse that didn't make sense to him. That's one of the verses that never made sense to me, is when Christ is giving the Sermon on the Mount, he says the meek will inherit the earth. Like, how many times have you heard that?
Yeah.
What meek person do you know who's inherited the earth?
Yeah.
Ever in human history. Like, it's not... It doesn't present itself as obviously true. And so you think, okay, well, maybe there's something more to that. Maybe it's meekness in a certain situation. Yeah. Maybe inheriting the world means something different. And so you go into that. Well, the problem is you're reading it in the wrong language. And I don't know how accurate this is, because I haven't yet gone through and figured out what the actual Greek, because I believe that passage in the New Testament is in Greek. What is actually being said, what it says in Greek, and how it translates to English. But what he said is, what he's saying there, if you can you can't get a direct translation, but it's more along the lines of he who has a sword and knows how to use it and doesn't draw it will inherit the earth.
Yeah.
And I think that makes way more sense to me. And you can immediately see that as true in history. You can immediately see leaders like that who've made, you know, huge impacts. And it's like that also makes the most sense with the rest of the Bible. That you should know how to fight temptation. You should know everything that you need to know to arm yourself so that you can fight back, but then don't. But you're always ready to.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that...
Just about? Is that...
That about... Yeah.
Do you want to do a quick...
it before going to...
Do you want to do a quick, maybe a little fun, like, exploration of, like pop culture with the shadow self? Like, unintentional uses?
Sure.
See, because I think it's one of those things where it's not like... With a theory, it's not like Carl Jung decided this and now it's a truism. It was a truism innately, and somebody finally was able to articulate it in a way that makes sense and you can process. But like one thing I think is cool is you see this like in a lot of places, like people struggling with the dark side. I mean, in Star Wars,
literally.
Yeah, people struggling with the dark side, and one thing that in series where it never actually comes to balance, it's good versus evil continually.
Yeah.
And you like the only way to achieve anything higher is to address the dark side in you, and that you have the capacity and completely understand the dark side. And so for Star Wars, for a second, I was thinking about this when I was thinking how I would rewrite the sequel trilogy to repair all the damage that The Last Jedi has done to my soul. Is there's this problem of the Jedi were clearly wrong in everything. They were too dogmatic and all this stuff, but that doesn't mean that they started out wrong. So you can like theorize it as if the Jedi like were trying to use the will of the Force, like follow the will of the Force and let the Force guide them. But then, you know, you started, or like an entire group, you have to start putting regulation in to try and like for the ultimate good. Okay, well you start limiting certain things. Well, eventually you ban the use of the dark side because it's such a strong temptation that people start falling to the dark side all the time. Okay, but did that actually help? Because now all the light side users know nothing about the dark side. So then when they come across it, they're much more susceptible to being tempted. So then all you can do is fight it and try and keep it from ever existing. But it exists innately, so it always keeps coming back. So you see that as like that makes the most sense as the struggle of the Jedi Order. And so then it's like, okay, well, how do you progress past Episode 6 with balance being brought to the Force, but still, as a viewer, you don't feel like balance has been brought to the Force. Like, you don't feel like once the dark side is dead and Luke's the only Jedi, that there's balance. Now it's just the light side. I think the most interesting thing that you could do that would actually be a very fulfilling story and is unique and isn't just repeating would be to, in some sense, explore Luke still having more lessons to learn and eventually realizing that he has to maybe having like a Force vision kind of situation where like maybe he goes back in the cave on Dagobah. I'm wasting all my good ideas. Someone's gonna steal
I was gonna say, I'm like, as soon as you said shadow stuff, I instantly go, wait, maybe the Dagobah cave scene actually makes sense if you think about it in that way.
Yeah,
because he sees his own head in the helmet.
Okay,
like,
do you want to hear one scene that I've written that's super cool?
Sure.
Okay. This is wasting really good potential by letting it be out on the internet where someone will use it. But here's my idea for it. In the 8th movie, Luke would return to Dagobah because he has basically all this stuff would happen, political issues, blah 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 blah. He's been in prison for a while, but now he has one person really powerful in the Force that he can train, but he's also having to deal with still the responsibility of trying to be a Jedi Master in this universe that has become more and more complex as time has went on. Eventually, he goes back to the cave on Dagobah to take his Padawan through it, so that she can face the trial he went through. But he ends up going on his own trial. All this stuff happens where he converses with all the other Force ghosts, and what you get is when he rejected Sidious and rejected Vader, he did the right thing, but he also shut out the dark side completely. And so since then, there's been limitations to what he can do and what he can teach. And so their the, you know, like maybe some voices from Yoda, maybe some Obi-Wan. And what I think would be really cool is if for some reason he can't understand it, Anakin and Vader are coming to him as two different ghosts. And so they're talking two different ways. He has the light and the dark side talking to him in the same person. And he eventually comes to the realization that there's something of Vader in him. And he could be as terrible as of a Sith as Vader was. And he knows that. He knew that at one point. So what he does is tries to purge himself of the dark side. And no, he has to face that. And then you see like a mask on a pedestal, Vader's mask on a pedestal in front of him. And symbolically, he puts it on to try and symbolically embrace that he's Vader. And then he sees light coming through a passage. And he walks through it. And he hears a lightsaber ignite. And he sees his young self standing in front of him, lightsaber drawn, so he draws his lightsaber. And they start hashing it out. And then he realizes that he has to embrace that there's the dark side in him, but not give into it. He puts the saber down and dies symbolically. So he's both sides of his force vision. And it isn't until he understands the entire force vision that he's able to move forward, transcend, and then that's part of the way that he's eventually able to become a force ghost. But he doesn't actually die there. But that's how he learns that in order for the galaxy to come back to balance, you have to just open yourself up to the force.
Yeah. That is true, because they always talk about the balance.
Yeah.
But they're always fighting for one side to win. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's probably the whole shadow thing's probably just everywhere.
Yeah, like I mean, Shadow Link, like that's
Come on.
how many shows have you watched where you need an evil twin episode?
Yeah, that's constant.
One of my favorites was there was a Mask of Zorro or a Zorro cartoon, which is completely forgotten about from probably the late '90s, early 2000s. But what was cool was there was an episode where like a Native American, I think, like summoned a spirit to become Zorro to defend him because he was inspired by Zorro.
Did you say a Native American?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Like he convert. I haven't seen this in a long time, but I think that's what it was. And he conversed with and like summoned a spirit. And so there's like this like smoky like Zorro, but like he's going way too far. So then Zorro has to find him. Well, the evil Zorro is this white ethereal Zorro, and then Zorro's like a man in black. So it was like this really cool in imagery, like this really cool twist of like the evil one is the white one and the good one's the black one. But yeah, I mean you see that in like anything. You see it in Spider-Man with the symbiote, and even when he rejects the symbiote, that's not the end of the lesson.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's a good example, by the way, of important story archetypes continuously always coming out, whether people intend it or not. It's like those stories are there, so it's obviously something that's important. Like as
there's some kind of
humans.
Universal human truth that we know.
That's like we've always had to deal with the shadow self thing. So we,
which maybe we'll bring that up again next week if we talk about the different predator and prey instincts of the brain.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little extra to that. If we don't have a guest, that's probably what we'll do.
Okay, yeah.
So
that'd be good.
You got any other like closing thoughts or statements on that topic?
I just instantly imagine like Jerry Springer thought of the day, where I go in. No, I mean it's just something. I mean, like we said, like depth psychology is such a. I mean, pun intended, deep, well of stuff. It's just it's so, there's so much to it. It's that's what I like about it, though, is, you can just keep exploring it.
Yeah.
And, and now it is interesting to, always have an eye out for seeing how those things manifest in pop culture or storytelling.
I guess my final word on it would probably be, if you're listening to this, don't just go, oh, let's think of all the terrible things, the idea from here would be to explore the topic further yourself. If you're interested, go look up the shadow self, maybe read some of Carl Jung's works or works by his contemporaries or students, and explore that yourself.
The source you can look up, by the way, is Carl Jung Collective Works, Volume 9.
Is there a subtitle for Volume 9?
Yeah, it's the collective unconscious.
Okay,
I think.
yeah.
And then he has a book called Aeon. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that one apparently dives into it a lot too.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to like build a list of psychoanalysts that I should probably read, like Nietzsche, Jung. Freud. I'll probably read a lot of Dostoevsky's work.
Yeah.
Like, it just those. The more I hear about them, the more it's like those are some really deep stories that I've done myself a disservice by not knowing about and like reading. But anyway, so that's all on the shadow self. So I guess now we'll just, what should we call this section where we talk about what we read and watch and do? I was thinking about catching up with Matt and Caleb, but then all I can think about is if there was ever like a video podcast of this, you just see ketchup spill on the table and say Matt and Caleb, and that'd be so Nickelodeon.
I'm down there.
Okay, I guess we'll call it Catching Up with Matt and Caleb till we get a better name.
Yeah.
If you have an idea for a name, just wherever you're watching this, leave it in the comments. But anyways, so I finished the Tao Te Ching, which I've been reading. The second to last passage.
Got you shook.
Yeah, it was really good. It was kind of like a summary of like the whole idea, and it's one of those things that you can't like bring back. Like you can't like just tell somebody like the what it says, partially because I can't remember the exact wording, but like you would kind of have had to go on the journey in order to understand the ending. Like if you showed somebody the end of Les Mis out of context, like as Hugh Jackman starts to die, like they'd be like, this doesn't make any sense. You've seen Les Mis, right?
Spoiler, dude. No, yeah.
If anybody cares about spoilers,
I don't
for
care
Les
anyway.
Mis,
Yeah.
like,
then they're
grow
lame.
up. But so that was really interesting, and I think it's one of those books where it's like it's basically like the Bible. Like you do yourself a disservice to just read it once. So I think I'm gonna like read it a couple more times. I'm still reading Jordan Peterson's book 12 Rules. Infinity War. I saw that, and I absolutely like. This gives me hope that Marvel like can still produce good stories and not just like entertainment events. The movies were starting to get just a little too much like an amusement park ride. And
well, you know
like
why I think though. I was thinking. I think they were like, maybe they were the last like that last phase or whatever felt like they were like, crap. We need to like get this stuff crammed out so that we can get to Infinity War. So I wonder if that was a little bit, but yeah.
Spider-Man definitely, like Homecoming, as much crap as I give it because I hate that movie, I do recognize that movie had to be turned around, like they had to go from conception to finished film like in like a year and a half, 2 years, like just
that is true.
Just
like,
no time at all, no time to break the story,
right?
Yeah,
it's like that's a really short time.
Well, the writers had like I think 3 days to write a pitch.
Wow.
And it's like, sure. Could I have done something more true to Spider-Man in 3 days? Yeah. Probably because I've been exposed to the source material, but that doesn't mean I could have written a better pitch in 3 days. So like, it's like, when would they have actually had time to study the character out there? I mean, they might not have anyways. They seem like a-holes. I dislike them, but
So anything else?
You made me watch the opening of Toxic Avenger, and I'm enthralled by that movie. Every frame, something is going on that's like worth paying attention to.
It's a bizarre movie.
Yeah, what have you been doing? Oh, and I've been building Nintendo Labo.
Oh yeah. I finally started watching, after way late to the party, started watching Daredevil, you know? And I already kind of talked to you about this, but it actually is interesting thinking about the whole Shadow Self thing. Is like, I told you
I really like the martyrdom stuff with him.
Yeah.
They really play into that.
Well, my favorite character so far, I'm not finished yet, but my favorite character is Wilson Fisk. And the reason why...
You did me a switcheroni. Now I look like an idiot.
No. You did that to yourself, pal. But no, but the reason why Fisk, I love him, is because really, you know there's some big bad boss, but then when you first see Fisk, you like feel for him, and like you're like, oh, this like poor, like he seems like he's like almost autistic or something, and he's just trying to get this girl, and he goes out on a date, and I'm like, man, I just feel for this guy. I feel really bad for him when the guys come in and interrupt his dinner. And I'm not trying to spoil anything, basically. I'm just talking about the character. But basically, they make you feel for this guy. And I haven't even gotten to his origin story yet, which maybe will be even more. But it is interesting where, like, they don't usually always do that.
Watch that. You gotta.
It'll probably be more insightful, even. But yeah, I like his character a lot. He's my favorite part of the show so far, weirdly enough.
One thing I would say about it that I don't think will spoil anything for you, because it's just like they keep that going. It's not like one of those stories where you meet the bad guy, you sympathize with him, and then he's just an a-hole the rest of the time, and you lose. Like Killmonger in Black Panther was that for me, where I can't understand why everyone thinks he's the best villain Marvel's ever done.
I haven't seen Black Panther yet either.
He starts out really interesting, but then by the end you're like, I can't root for this guy. Like his idea is interesting and maybe right, it could be, but his behavior throughout the entire thing, like there's no redeeming him. Like it just didn't work. With Fisk, all the way through the end, I kept asking myself, wait, what's his plan? Because that might actually be a good idea. Why am I against him again? Well, he is doing some crappy things, but is Daredevil really going to help the city if he stops him? Like, and they don't like heavy-handed like make you think about that. It's just so well written that if you're paying attention, you turn it over in your head and go, who's actually going to do the most good?
Yeah, that's what's really interesting is any villains that really make you question, go like, Because there's like, it's interesting too. It's like, well, because a lot of times it comes down to this thing where they have this idea of like, yeah, you might have to, break a few eggs to make an omelet. Usually that's like a good compelling argument sometimes is you're like, oh, this could help like millions of people by maybe having to like, maybe a couple people get kidnapped or something. But so that's always something where it's like,
like the whole
it's an enticing idea. I was about to bring up Watchmen. Yeah, I was gonna say
killing
like
millions to save billions.
Yeah. And yeah, that's interesting. I also was reading Peterson, and this is just an interesting thing.
What rule are you on?
I just finished Rule. I'm like behind, but I just finished Rule. I reread some because it had been a while, so I reread the last couple chapters. But I was reading the Rule.
They're really dense, like.
Oh man, maybe you'll remember which chapter this was because I think it was the one. I think it was the one where it's like treat yourself. Like it might have been the one after that.
Okay.
I don't know if I could look at it, but
treat yourself like someone you're responsible for.
Maybe, but I think it might have been the one after. But you'll know. There's a part at the end of one of the chapters near the end where he was talking about. I struggle with nihilism a lot. Like everything's meaningless, so what's the point, sort of thing. And he was making like these arguments where he's just like no, like, and it was such a matter of fact way that it was interesting. He was like, no, like nihilism is the worst thing you can get into, and he was like, because he was saying that like you hear the posed question all the time. Well, if we're all going to be dead in a million years, what does anything matter? And he goes, the answer. The answer seems like why. Well, then it doesn't matter what I do. There's no meaning. And he says, but the answer should be any dumb fool can take a period of time and say that it's meaningless. Yeah. And he was just like that end of that chapter was like whoa, like I was like really like getting like a ton out of that.
Well,
chapter.
And when he says he kind of doesn't go like you're wrong, but he goes, how can you say that that's not an excuse for you to just not do anything now? It's like, if you measure it out and convince yourself that there's no point to you doing anything, you suffer, you continue to suffer. And he kind of makes a point of that being like evolutionarily, you shouldn't be stagnant like that. But it's like, oh, well, if I suffer, then clearly I'm not going to make that choice. And he's like, the drug in it, the thing that keeps you doing that is, well, now you have no responsibility. You have no opportunity. You have no risk of failing because you never tried to succeed.
Yeah, it was good. It was good stuff.
Hopefully we can get somebody who's like deep rooted nihilistic. I'd really like to know.
I'd like
somebody who like doesn't think that there's any value in fighting back and actually thinks that their nihilism is in some way beneficial. I'd really like to know.
Yeah, because my bottom line on it, because I've dabbled in it a lot lately. It's actually my struggle. I'd say it's my biggest struggle actually. And it's because it's just something that I'm constantly thinking about. But one thing I had a conversation with someone about was, at the end of the day, everything good, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, our sound guy was moving.
At the end of the day, I was like, okay, so everything after we die, let's say that you just go into the dirt and nothing happens. And I've heard compelling arguments for that. I don't buy it necessarily because you don't know. But say that is what happens. You go into the dirt, nothing happens. Everyone who's died before, they're gone. It doesn't matter. Everyone's going to die or whatever. At the end of the, no matter what, at the very end of it, you're going to be alive for a certain amount of time, maybe 80, 90 years, and a bunch of other people are going to be alive for that time. I still can't find an argument where you wouldn't go, why wouldn't you try to help those people? Because the only time you're alive, the only time that anything's happening for your like consciousness is you can actually make other people's life better. That's all they're experiencing is this little 60-year, like 80-year stint. Why wouldn't you make that better? I guess you could. I don't know. Yeah, we need someone on maybe.
Yeah, imagine if you left something that even after you were dead and you couldn't view the rewards. You knew before you died that you had left some kind of impact that was going to reverberate a couple generations down at the very least. Then you know that somehow you were still impacting the world for the betterment, even after you were gone. And sometimes I think about the like, yeah, what if when we died, like that's it, we just died. Sometimes that sounds like, if that's the case, awesome, because that just means I get to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Like I'm done. Like what a relief. So I might as well work hard. Like I think that would be more disappointing if you died and there was nothing, but somehow for a brief moment you get to know whether you were right or wrong before you like cease to exist entirely as consciousness. That would be a disappointing moment. Realizing that you had wasted your whole life and now there's nothing else you can do. Like for me, it would be disappointing. Like, I basically lived my life as if I was dead, and now I'm dead. Now I got no other opportunities. But if I had lived my life and like done something that made an impact and helped, and then I died, I'd be like, oh, what a relief! Like I get I'm done now. Like I get a break. And maybe what if like there's scientific evidence that all of your like neurons like fire one last time as you die, like everything in your brain just shoots off. What if you're like trapped in that moment? Like when your consciousness seeks to exist, it's like a pause. It's like the last thought is your eternity.
Yeah.
And your last thought is either, oh, I fucked everything up, or oh, that worked and now I'm at peace. That'd kind of be like heaven or hell.
Yeah. I heard the most convincing thing, it's so simple, but I thought it was a good way of explaining it, was one time Penn Jillette, I think, because he's a hardcore atheist, and he was having an argument with someone about where you go when you die or whatever. And they were like, whoever the person was.
This was supposed to be our wrap-up, and now we're doing a whole nother.
Well, I'll just fit in this guy. I think it's interesting about nihilism, but he said, well, how can you just stop being? Like, and this is the thing, even as a child, I have that understanding. It's like, well, how could you just cease to exist? Because I'm existing now. It's so hard to comprehend. And Penn was like, do you remember 1860? Like, do you remember, 1925? It's like, no. Okay. And I was just sort of like, oh, like, yeah, that's like a good, weird way of saying it. It's not like there was a certain point where I wasn't conscious. So I guess it could cease in that way. But anyway, many more topics, many more Mondays.
Yeah. Well, I think that catches us up. So I think that's where we're going to end it this week.
Cue the music now while we jibber jabber.
Well,
we'll just start
before that, I'd like to say thanks to our audio engineer Eric for recording this for us. And we don't have any like social media pages or anything set up yet. So wherever you're finding this, good job.
How did you?
Yeah.
Who is this? who are you?
How are you listening to this? But we hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully in the future weeks we'll get this hammered out a little bit better and have places for you to easily find stuff and comment back to us, because one thing I do want, like that I really want to happen is the audience to be able to get involved on the discussion. So like if somebody has a really good point in the comments, maybe we could get them on later and like have an alternative version of the discussion. But anyways, thanks for listening so much, and we'll see you next week.
Later.
Bye bye.